Picture this. You're standing in the Egyptian desert, staring up at the Great Pyramid of Giza, 481 feet tall, 2.3 million stone blocks, built around 2560 BC. You've seen the photos 1,000 times, but standing there in person, you finally understand why people lose words trying to describe it. It is, by any honest measure, one of the most extraordinary things human beings have ever built. Now picture this. You're standing in the jungles of Guatemala, staring up at Temple 1 at Tikal. Same basic shape. 4 sides rising to a point, astronomically aligned, built by a civilization that had zero contact with ancient Egypt. Zero. The Atlantic Ocean sits between them. Thousands of years of human history sit between them, and yet there it is. A pyramid. Now add Cambodia, add Sudan, add the structures found across ancient China, add the step pyramids of Indonesia, add what some researchers are now documenting in West Africa. Wherever you look, on every continent where ancient complex societies emerged, you find the same shape reaching toward the sky, the same geometry, the same obsession with pointing something at the heavens and making sure it lasts forever. The standard explanation you get in school is straightforward and, on the surface, reasonable. Humans independently invented the pyramid shape because it's structurally logical. If you're going to stack a massive amount of heavy material and you want it to stay standing, a broad base tapering to a point is simply good engineering. Parallel invention. Problem, solution, same answer. Case closed. Except the more closely you look at the actual numbers, the more that explanation starts to feel like it's doing a lot of heavy lifting. Because we're not just talking about similar shapes, we're talking about similar angles, similar internal chamber alignments, similar astronomical orientations towards specific stars and constellations, similar ritual functions, similar placement relative to reverse and cardinal directions. At what point does parallel invention stop being a clean explanation and start being a word we use because the alternative makes us uncomfortable? That's the question this video is actually about, not whether pyramids exist on multiple continents. They do. That part isn't debated. The question is what that means. Whether the evidence, looked at honestly and without flinching, points towards something the mainstream timeline of human civilization hasn't fully accounted for. The answer is stranger and more fascinating than anything you learned in a classroom. And it starts with a number that most people have never heard. Here's the number. 51.85 degrees. That's the angle of inclination of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The ratio isn't arbitrary. It encodes the mathematical relationship between the circumference and the diameter of a circle, what we now call pi, to a degree of precision that ancient Egyptians weren't supposed to possess. Fine. Remarkable engineering. Isolated genius. Except the pyramid at Cholula in Mexico, the largest pyramid by volume ever constructed on Earth, uses a strikingly similar slope ratio, built by people who, according to the accepted timeline, had no contact with Egypt. No shared written language, no shared trade network, no boats capable of crossing the Atlantic. Go to Cambodia. Angkor Wat, built in the 12th century AD, is oriented to the west and aligned so precisely with the spring equinox sunrise that modern astronomers have confirmed it functions as a solar calendar accurate to within minutes. Now go to Chichen Itza in Mexico. El Castillo Pyramid produces a shadow effect on the spring equinox, where a serpent of light appears to descend the northern staircase. Same astronomical event. Different continent, different century, different culture. Same obsession with encoding the equinox into stone with engineering precision that most modern construction companies would struggle to replicate. Go to Sudan. The pyramids of Meroe, built by the Kushite civilization, number over 200 structures and are steeper than Egyptian pyramids, more numerous, and almost completely unknown to the general public. They sit in a civilization that was contemporary with but distinct from Egypt, and they point to a broader pattern across the African continent that archaeology is only beginning to map properly. Go to China. The flat-topped pyramidal mausoleums of the Han Dynasty emperors near Xi'an are so large they were initially dismissed by Western researchers as natural hills. There are over 100 of them. Here is the fact that stops researchers cold when they look at it honestly. The Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan in Mexico has a base perimeter of 2,613 feet. The Great Pyramid of Giza has a base perimeter of 3,023 feet. The ratio between those two numbers is almost exactly the ratio of the Moon's diameter to the Earth's diameter. Two structures, two continents, two civilizations with no documented contact. One ratio that connects them to the same astronomical reality. At what point does coincidence require more explanation than the thing it's trying to explain away? That's not a rhetorical question. That is the actual methodological problem sitting at the center of this conversation, and nobody in the mainstream has given it a satisfying answer yet. So what are we actually dealing with here? There are three serious explanations on the table, not fringe theories, not ancient aliens, not anything that requires you to abandon your critical thinking at the door. Three frameworks that researchers, archaeologists, and historians have genuinely argued for, each with real evidence behind it and real problems in front of it. The first is independent invention. The pyramid shape emerged separately on multiple continents because it is, as mentioned earlier, structurally optimal for large-scale monumental construction. Wide base, tapering sides, stable geometry. Any sufficiently advanced society that wants to build something enormous and permanent will eventually converge on similar solutions, the same way multiple cultures independently invented the wheel, agriculture, and writing. This explanation is intellectually honest, and it covers a lot of ground. The problem is that it explains the shape. It does not explain the astronomical alignments. It does not explain the internal chamber geometry. It does not explain why the mathematical ratios keep appearing across structures separated by oceans and millennia. Structural logic gets you to pyramid-shaped. It does not get you to aligned with Orion's belt. The second explanation is pre-Columbian contact. The idea that ocean crossings happened earlier, more frequently, and more consequentially than the standard timeline acknowledges. Thor Heyerdahl sailed a reed boat from Peru to Polynesia in 1947 to demonstrate that ancient Pacific crossings were physically possible. Genetic studies published in 2020 confirmed DNA links between South American populations and Polynesian islanders, proving contact occurred centuries before Columbus. The currents of the Atlantic and Pacific are not barriers. For experienced open water navigators, they are highways. This explanation is gaining serious traction in academic circles that would have dismissed it 30 years ago. The problem is that documented contact, even proven contact, between specific populations does not by itself explain the full global pattern. It gets you part of the way. It does not get you all the way. The third explanation is the one that makes mainstream academia visibly uncomfortable, that there exists a prior civilization predating the ones we have on record, sophisticated enough to have seeded architectural and astronomical knowledge across multiple regions before whatever catastrophe erased it from the conventional timeline. This is the hypothesis that serious researchers like Graham Hancock have spent decades building an evidence base for. The problem here is not that the idea is inherently absurd. The problem is that the physical evidence for the civilization itself remains frustratingly indirect. We have the fingerprints. We have not yet found the hand. All three explanations have merit. All three have limits. The honest position is that none of them alone closes the case. Here's what's strange about where we've ended up. The facts in this video are not disputed. The pyramids exist. The angles are what they are. The astronomical alignments are measurable and verified. The mathematical ratios are in the numbers, not in the interpretation. Nobody is arguing about whether the pyramid of the sun exists or whether Angkor Wat tracks the equinox. Those are settled. What's being argued about is what we're allowed to conclude from them, and that argument reveals something important. Not about ancient civilizations, about us, about how knowledge gets protected by the institutions built to study it, about how a researcher who publishes findings that fit the existing timeline gets tenure and citation counts, while a researcher who publishes findings that challenge it gets a documentary on a streaming service and a Wikipedia page written by people who haven't read the primary sources. That dynamic does not mean the challengers are right, but it does mean the gatekeeping itself has become part of the problem. Because here's what honest archaeology looks like when it's working correctly. It follows the evidence wherever it goes, including into uncomfortable territory. It updates when new data arrives, the way it updated when Göbekli Tepe in Turkey was dated to 11,600 years ago and rewrote the timeline of organized human construction overnight. Nobody predicted that site. Nobody's model had room for it. And then it was there, undeniable, in the ground, and the timeline moved. That has happened before. It will happen again. The question is not whether our current model of ancient civilization is incomplete. It is. The question is, how incomplete? So here's where that leaves you personally. Pull up a photo right now of a stepped pyramid. Don't look at the caption. Don't look at the location tag. Just look at the structure. You cannot tell which continent it's on. You cannot tell which civilization built it or when. You are looking at a shape that meant something so fundamental, so urgent, so cosmically necessary to multiple unconnected cultures that they moved millions of tons of stone to express it. Whatever that meaning was, it mattered more to them than anything else they could have built. We don't fully know what they were trying to say. We don't fully know how they all arrived at the same way of saying it, but the fact that they did, on every continent, pointing at the same sky, is either the greatest coincidence in human history or the most important question we are not asking loudly enough. Which one of those makes more sense to you? Let me know in the comments, because this conversation is just getting started.